Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. NATO says its members will consult and decide together on the timeline to leave Afghanistan. In a press conference, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said NATO will end its mission in Afghanistan only when conditions allow. This follows US President Donald Trump's vow to bring American troops back home by this Christmas. Russia says Armenia and Azerbaijan have confirmed their foreign ministers' visit to Moscow for peace talks. A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry said active preparations for the dialogue are now underway. Earlier, President Vladimir Putin called for humanitarian ceasefire in Nagorno-Karabakh and invited the foreign ministers for talks. At least 400 people have been killed in the fighting since it broke out on the 27th of September. Kyrgyzstan's President Sooronbay Jeenbekov has signed an order dismissing Prime Minister Kubatbek Boronov and his cabinet. Kyrgyz lawmakers said Boronov tendered his resignation after opposition groups seized government buildings. Protests broke out across the country calling for the government to resign over alleged vote buying for parliamentary polls. The UN's World Food Programme has won the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger. Norwegian Nobel Committee's chairperson says the WFP acted as a driving force to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war. A spokesperson for the UN Food Agency said this is a proud moment, nothing short of a feat. Europe has reported nearly 97,000 new COVID-19 cases, the highest overnight toll for the region. India has registered 964 deaths and over 70,000 cases in the last 24 hours, with the infections tally crossing 6.9 million. In Pakistan, 8 people have died overnight, taking the death toll to 6,552. Globally, the infection tally has crossed 36.5 million, with over 1 million deaths. And in football, Argentina beat Ecuador 1-0 to bag full 3 points in the World Cup qualifier. Lionel Messi scored the match winner from the spot after Lucas Ocampos was tackled inside the penalty area. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. NATO says its members will consult and decide together on the timeline to leave Afghanistan. This follows US President Donald Trump's vow to bring American troops back home by this Christmas. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said NATO will end its mission in Afghanistan only when conditions allow. In a press conference, Stoltenberg said it is in NATO's interest to preserve the long-term security of Afghanistan. He added, the alliance will leave when there is no risk of the country becoming a militant's haven again. NATO ended its combat operations in Afghanistan in 2014, but maintains a force of 12,000 to train local forces. Russia says Armenia and Azerbaijan have confirmed their foreign ministers' visit to Moscow for peace talks. At least 400 people have been killed in the fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh since the 27th of September. A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry said active preparations for the talks are now underway. Earlier, President Vladimir Putin called for the humanitarian ceasefire in the region and invited the two foreign ministers for the dialogue. France's US and Russian representatives are also set to meet in Moscow on Monday to seek a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Armenia reports another 26 deaths among its military increasing their side's toll to 376. Kyrgyzstan's President Sooronbay Jeenbekov has signed an order dismissing Prime Minister Kubatbek Boronov and his cabinet. Kyrgyz lawmakers said Boronov tendered his resignation after opposition groups seized government buildings. Earlier, Jeenbekov said he is ready to resign to end power vacuum once a new cabinet is appointed. In a statement, he said legal order in the country needs to be restored at the earliest. Meanwhile, acting Secretary of the Security Council, Umerbek Suvaliev, said he has sufficient resources to control the situation. Protests broke out across the country, calling for the government to resign over alleged vote buying for parliamentary polls. The US has imposed sweeping sanctions on Iran's banking sector aimed at crippling Tehran's economy. The move can largely cut off Iran from the world's financial system, just as it tries to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. In a statement, the Treasury Department said it has sanctioned 18 major Iranian banks. Last month, President Donald Trump announced that his administration is imposing sanctions on Iran's central bank. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif reacted strongly to the latest curbs. In a tweet, he said Washington is targeting Tehran's remaining channels to pay for food and medicine in the midst of a pandemic. Zarif said conspiring to starve a population is a crime against humanity. Syria's president says regaining the control of occupied Syrian territories is a major precondition for any peace talks with Israel. In an interview, Bashar al-Assad said Syria's stance has been very clear since the peace talks with Israel began in the 1990s. The president said peace for Syria is related to the rights of the people and the right to its territories. But he said no Israeli official is ready to move one step forward towards making peace with Damascus. He said no negotiations are currently taking place between the two. Syria and Israel have been arch enemies, particularly since the war in 1967 when Israel occupied the Syrian Golan Heights. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he is ready to work with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to counter Russia's influence. In a statement, the Downing Street spokesman said Johnson has offered support to Ukraine for its defense and security. He said the two leaders agreed that the situation in Belarus is a matter of concern. The Premier hailed NATO's decision to grant Ukraine the status of enhanced opportunities partner. London and Kiev have clinched a partnership agreement that includes a free trade deal covering goods, services, and tariffs. In the US, the FBI says it has foiled a plot to abduct and overthrow Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Officials says the kidnapping plot involved 6 men who planned to hold a treason trial for Whitmer. The group planned to gather 200 men to storm the Capitol building and take hostages, including Governor Whitmer. The FBI said that the group decided to attack the governor at her home if their first plan failed. It said the accused held weapons training in several states and at times attempted to create bombs. At a press conference, the governor tied the plot against her to President Donald Trump's incendiary rhetoric. She said the president was stoking distrust and giving comfort to those who spread fear, hatred, and division. Michigan's governor had become a lightning rod for the coronavirus skeptics after enacting strict measures. Venezuela's National Constituent Assembly has approved a law expanding President Nicolas Maduro's powers. The law allows Maduro to confidentially sign new oil deals with firms and foreign nations in response to U.S. sanctions. Assembly's President Diosdado Cabello said they can provide a legal instrument to continue fighting the U.S. blockade. The law will allow changes to ownership of joint ventures between the state oil company and private firms. Maduro's government faces severe financial problems amid limitations on the export by Washington. In Mali, kidnapped French aid workers Sophie Petonin and opposition leaders Somalia Sis have been freed. In a statement, Mali's presidency said the ex-hostages have been taken to the capital Bamako. It said 2 other Italian nationals have also been freed. In a Twitter post, French President Emmanuel Macron expressed immense relief on the release. Macron also expressed France's continued support for Mali in its fight against an insurgency. Sis's supporters gathered at the Bamako airport to greet the opposition leader on his arrival. China has formally signed an agreement to join the World Health Organization-led COVAX facility. The project is aimed at developing at least 3 safe and effective vaccines for all the scheme's participants. In a tweet, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said the decision was an important step to uphold the concept of health for all. She said China has ample COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing capabilities. The spokesperson said Beijing will prioritize supplying vaccine to developing countries once it is ready. COVAX facility aims to deliver 2 billion doses of vaccine globally by next year's end. The Chinese government has said it may have a coronavirus vaccine available as early as next month. The World Health Organization has reported a record one-day increase in global coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. The total cases increased by over 338,000, while the previous WHO record was over 330,000 on October the 2nd. The unabated outbreak in India has claimed more than 106,000 lives while infecting over 6.8 million people. More in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 has broken all past records of single-day surge, reminding the world that the pandemic is far from over. After managing to wriggle out of the eye of the COVID-19 storm, Europe is once again in the red zone with record-high new cases. France has announced new restrictions to curb the aggressive spread of the virus.
Vous avez raison.
The virus has been spreading faster for several weeks as part of our strategy in places where it's spreading too quickly and particularly where it's spreading a lot among elderly people who are the most vulnerable. And where we see more and more emergency beds taken up, we need to move towards more restrictions.
U.S. President Donald Trump has been cleared for public appearance by his doctors after recovering from COVID-19. While the U.S. remains the worst-hit country, the disease continues to rip through Latin America and India with the vaccine as the only hope. World Health Organization chief says a COVID-19 vaccine can be available as early as the end of this year.
At the same time, we have to invest in new technology, and that's why we launched the ACT Accelerator. We will need vaccines, and there is hope that by the end of this year, we may have a vaccine. There is hope.
In Africa, the coronavirus crisis is expected to drive a 3.3% economic contraction in sub-Saharan African economies. The World Bank has warned that the global pandemic can push around 40 million Africans into extreme poverty. Meanwhile, the disease is once again surging in Iran, which has reported its highest daily surge in new cases overnight.
In Pakistan, 8 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours, raising the death toll to 6,552. The Health Ministry says 661 people tested positive in a day. The ministry said there are 8,335 total active cases in the country. It said out of over 317,000 cases detected so far, more than 302,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 139,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while over 100,000 have been reported in Punjab. In the federal capital Islamabad, over 17,000 people have contracted the virus. Pakistan is preparing for the expansion of Saudi Arabia's flagship pre-departure immigration facility, MAKKAH route. In an interview, the spokesman of the Religious Affairs Ministry said it has established contact with Saudi Hajj authorities to complete the task. MAKKAH route was finalized during Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Pakistan in February last year. It gave immigration clearance to 22,000 Pakistani pilgrims prior to their Hajj departure during the project's pilot phase in Islamabad. The ministry said it is awaiting approval from Saudi authorities to include Lahore Karachi, Peshawar and Quetta in the program for next year's Hajj. Some 2.5 million pilgrims visit the holiest site of Islam in Makkah and Medina during the week-long Hajj each year. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Hurricane Delta of Category 3 is headed towards U.S. southwestern state of Louisiana. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Delta can cause storm surges along portions of the northern Gulf Coast. It is forecast to make landfall between the cities of Lake Charles and Lafayette. The Hurricane Center warns the storm can unleash tornadoes as it moves over land and drops up to 10 inches of rain. The NHC says Delta, with maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, can later weaken. This will be the 10th named storm to make a U.S. landfall this year, breaking a record held since 1916. Scientists are collecting samples from the melting Arctic region to know more about the underlying ecosystem. What about this research in this report?
As the Arctic melts and reveals swathes of ocean previously impenetrable to scientific investigation, the race is on to document the rich ecosystem lying beneath it. Scientists are using new technologies that can identify the species currently roaming the frigid northern waters. They hope that doing so will help build a case to designate large parts of the ocean as marine protected zones. Researchers are using environmental DNA sampling to detect whether an animal has visited certain waters by the sample it has left behind.
The Arctic is quite rich in biodiversity, and it provides habitat for a whole number of different species, many of which are very specific to those areas. And at the same time, it's actually an area that needs much more research. There's a lot about the Arctic that we don't know, and huge knowledge gaps. So we need to really focus our attention on understanding this ecosystem much better.
Through this research, scientists aspire to reach a reference point for how global warming has affected species distributions as the seas hot up. They believe the Arctic can be completely free of sea ice in the summer within decades. This will make it a highly attractive route for transcontinental shipping from Asia to the US and Europe. Increased shipping brings with it a risk of accidents and oil spills.
Much of the Arctic ecosystem is unprotected, and this is really quite a concern because as the ice recedes and this whole area warms and is changing so rapidly, it means that it's now quite vulnerable to the impact of human activities. And that's why we really need a very strong global ocean treaty to protect these areas.
Currently, there are no environmental protection areas covering the international waters around the North Pole. Environmentalists hope that evidence of a teeming ecosystem in the Arctic will help bolster the case for halting the advance of human activity.
The UN's World Food Programme has won the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger. Norwegian Nobel Committee's chairperson says the WFP acted as a driving force to prevent the use of hunger as the weapon of war. The chairperson said the agency has also demonstrated impressive abilities during the pandemic. A spokesperson for the UN Food Agency said, "This is a proud moment, nothing short of a feat." The award is worth $1.1 million and will be awarded in Norway's capital city of Oslo on the 10th of December. An Iraqi artist is making a name for his country and for himself by creating art through strings and nails. Though the art is rare, it remains difficult for him to sell his pieces at a good price in his own country. But the challenges have not dampened the spirits of the 26-year-old graduate in sports. This report has the details.
String art is time-consuming and requires a lot of concentration. But for the skilled hands of Saeed Huwaidi, the art comes naturally to him. He has made portraits of many big names, including Iraqi footballer Ahmed Radi, as well as global star Cristiano Ronaldo.
قدرت أوصل لهذا المستوى يعني.
To reach this level, I did and failed about 100 pieces until, thank God, I reached my current level. This art is rare at a global level. There are only a few string artists. In Iraq, it is not present at all.
String art is believed to have first been developed at the end of the 19th century to help children understand mathematics. Each piece takes about 10 to 15 days to complete. Through practice and perseverance, Vaidi says he can now create portraits as well.
To be honest, I consider this to be my source of income. I practice this art and have sold many paintings. There are different levels. In the beginning, I wasn't doing portraits because portraits are very difficult and need a high level of concentration and energy.
Vaidi has proved that with hard work and skills, you can even transform something as mundane as nails into beautiful art. Now he wants to start crafting larger pieces and gain recognition in Iraq and beyond.
Lows in the highs of the business world now. European Council President Charles Michel says UK Premier Boris Johnson must make concessions in the row over access to British waters. Speaking in Dublin, Michel said the EU and the UK negotiators now face a moment of truth in the trade talks. The bloc's official said his message is simple, that the EU stands in full solidarity with Ireland. He said they need significant assurances from the British friends in the coming days. Both the sides are set to meet today in London to resume trade negotiations. The two sides say they are inching towards a deal that will govern nearly $900 billion in trade after 31st of December. European Union lawmakers have broken talks with EU government representatives over the bloc's budget. Countries are divided over the EU negotiators' push for €1.8 trillion coronavirus recovery package. EU lawmakers say more funds are needed to finance key programs, including for infrastructure, defense, and student exchanges. In a tweet, a spokesperson for Germany said a willingness to compromise is needed on all sides. Delays in reaching a deal can further damage the EU economy as many sectors rely on the EU funds. Talks will resume in the coming days, and if a deal is reached eventually, national parliaments will then have to ratify it. OPEC Secretary General Mohammed Barkindo says the worst is over for the oil market. The market faced a price and demand collapse due to the coronavirus pandemic. In its annual World Oil Outlook, the OPEC said the oil demand was likely to increase by nearly 10 million barrels per day. It said the lockdown-induced economic recession has resulted in the sharpest downturn in energy and oil demand. The OPEC said a big question hanging over energy and oil markets was about the impact on consumer behavior. The Oil Regulatory Authority said that oil will remain the largest contributor to the energy mix by 2045, followed by gas and coal. The selection of new Director General of the World Trade Organization is entering its final stage, and a female looks set to take the reins. The last two on the list are former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala and South Korean Trade Minister Yo Myung-hae. The WTO said the two women are the remaining candidates for the top position after the field was narrowed down. It said the final candidate will replace incumbent chief Roberto Azevedo. The WTO will start a third and final selection round for the 19th of October. Stocks in Asia-Pacific traded mixed as revived hopes for a U.S. stimulus deal eclipsed weaker than expected jobs data. Stocks in mainland China surged as they returned to trade after a week-long holiday. The Shanghai Composite jumped close to 2%, while the Shenzhen Component gained over 3%. Over in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index advanced fractionally. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 dipped marginally, while the Topix Index dropped over 0.5%. Meanwhile, shares in Australia gained, with the ASX 200 up fractionally. Markets in South Korea and Taiwan are closed for holidays. European markets are trading mixed as investors monitor talks on the fresh coronavirus relief package. The pan-European stocks 600 edged up, with retail stocks adding over 1%. London's FTSE led the gains, adding more than 0.5%, while Paris's CAC 40 also gained marginally. Italy's FTSE MIB slipped close to 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX shed fractionally. And in football, Argentina beat Ecuador 1-0 to bag full 3 points in the World Cup qualifier. Lionel Messi scored the match winner from the spot after Lucas Ocampos was tackled inside the penalty area. While the goalkeeper was guessing the right way, Messi went to his left to score. Argentina had another great chance early in the second half when goalkeeper saved a low-driven shot by Ocampos. In other qualifiers for Latin America, Paraguay draw level with Peru 2-2. While Uruguay edged Chile 2-1. Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.